Racial inequality had been a problem for hundreds of years. Slavery has been present in the world since ancient times, up until present day. But as many times people tried to do things about it, even making laws, people still found a way not to abide by these laws, and they were not enforced. For example, in 1848, a 5-year-old named Sarah Roberts was not allowed to attend a local primary school because she was black. Sarah was forced to walk past 5 schools to reach the colored school. Her father, Benjamin Roberts, challenged the court's ruling and took school segregation to the state legislature. In 1855, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts banned segregated schools. But even 100 years later, this problem was still unsolved. On April 23, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led a march of 50,000 people from Roxbury to the Boston Commons in response to segregated housing and poor and racially imbalanced schools. The desegregation of Boston public schools was a period in which the Boston public schools were under court control to desegregate through a system of busing students from 1974 to 1988. The call for desegregation in the first years of its implementation led to a series of racial protests and riots that brought national attention, particularly from 1974 to 1976. The year is 1855. After failing to convince the Boston courts that segregation in schools is wrong, Benjamin Roberts, Sarah Roberts' father, takes his claim to state level and sues the Boston school system for excluding Sarah from a mostly white school just because she was black.
I'm Benjamin Roberts, the father of Sarah Roberts, and I think it's ridiculous that my daughter has to walk past 5 public schools just because she's black. Just because those public schools won't accept black people.
In determining the qualifications of scholars to be admitted into any public school or any district school in this Commonwealth, no district shall be made on account of the race, color, or religious opinions of the applicant or scholar.
Flash forward to 1954, almost 100 years later. The Brown v. Board of Education is occurring.
The Supreme Court has voted unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools violates the 14th Amendment.
The second Brown case is happening a year later.
Court orders that states integrate their schools with all deliberate speed.
Even with this progress, schools were still segregated, and the difference between the white schools and black schools were extreme, especially in Boston. This led to many people protesting the segregation. For example, in 1964, thousands of black students and hundreds of white students boycott school for one day to protest the inequalities of segregated schools, which gets the attentions of state education officials. State officials agree to study racial imbalances in public schools.
I'm Massachusetts Governor John A. Vlop, and I propose the Radical Racial Imbalance Act. It is a law that requires Massachusetts State Board of Education to have desegregation plans for racially imbalanced schools. Any school with an enrollment containing more than 50% of black students is considered racially imbalanced. Boston Public Schools have 46 racially imbalanced schools.
Cooperation from Suburban Districts, Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity, METCO, is established and enables about 220 black students to attend suburban schools. The Boston school community uses this as a means of fulfilling the Racial Imbalance Act.
In the Morgan v. Hennigan case, the Harvard Center for Law and Education filed a class action lawsuit against the City of Boston School Committee on behalf of the 15 parents and their 43 children. They allege that the city defendants have intentionally brought about and maintained racial segregation in the Boston public schools. Also, the number of racially imbalanced schools in Boston has increased to 75 since the second Brown case.
I am Judge W. Arthur Garrity. The Boston School Committee has engaged in segregation. As a temporary measure until the school committee develops a plan of their own, we will adopt the State Board of Education's Racial Imbalance Plan. This plan incorporates court-ordered busing as a way to immediately begin desegregating Boston schools.
This court-ordered busing will include busing students between South Boston, the home of the Irish working class, and Roxbury, the heart of Boston's black community. The busing sparked many race riots throughout Boston. People did not want their kids learning with other kids who were not their own race. People threw rocks at buses, marched, beat others up, and sometimes even killed.
Let's get him. Nobody will be able to get away with the things he's campaigning for.
Yeah! Ah!
What is this atrocity? Something needs to happen. I'll call a meeting with the ROAR, which stands for Restore Our Alienated Rights, and I'll inform the other anti-busing leaders and city councilmen today. Using tactics modeled on the civil rights movement, ROAR activists led marches in Charlestown and South Boston, public prayers, sit-ins of school buildings and government offices, protests at the homes of prominent Bostonians, mock funerals, and even a small march in Washington, D.C. By 1976, with the failure to block implementation of the busing plan, the organization declined. Thank you all for coming today. For those of you who have not been here before, this is one of the many meetings of the Restore Our Alienated Rights, or ROAR. My name is Louise Day Hicks, and I believe that a racially imbalanced school is not educationally harmful. We're fighting together to oppose desegregation in America and return to the safety of segregation. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to say?
Yes, I have a question. Many African American parents believe that all Negro schools are inferior to all white schools. What is your perspective on this topic? I know that the NAACP is aiding Black parents and allowing them to bring complaints to the Boston School Committee, which you are a part of.
Thank you, ma'am, for your question. Even though Judge W. Arthur Garrity has ruled in the Negro parents' favor, administering that the school committee should integrate the two separate school systems, I believe that segregation is what allows for the success of all students, and that it is unnecessary for the NAACP to aid Negro parents whose children are in the same exact level school system as our white children. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Do you agree that the desegregation leads to the unity of Negro and white students, or violence?
Thank you again. Desegregation leads to chaos. This statement is supported by the incidents in South Boston on September 12, 1974, where Negro students were escorted to the South Boston public school systems, where some white children were injured, emotionally and physically, by the unwanted entrance of Negro students. Desegregation forces an unnatural balance to occur in our public schools and should be terminated forever.